Hey everyone, we are going to be going live in just a minute. We're just waiting for our notifications to go out through the internet world and let everybody know that we're going live. See you soon. So you want to learn how to increase overhead flexibility. Well, in today's show, we're going to show you some really amazing tools for how to increase that dreaded overhead flexibility that holds so many people back with so many movements. And we're going to show you some really cool stuff that a lot of people don't understand and talk about the biggest mistake that people make when trying to increase overhead flexibility. So make sure you stick around right to the end. All that and more coming up.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.
Hey everyone, in case we haven't met, my name is Rad Burmeister. I'm one of the co-founders of Unity Gym and co-creators of the UMS, the Unified Movement System. Over here is Phil White. He's our resident physiotherapist and all-round good guy. How you doing today, Phil?
Very well, very well. Ready for another week. Excited. Though a short week for me. I'm heading up to a conference in Sunshine Coast on Wednesday, so just 2 shows for me this week.
Yeah, cool. Nice one.
Yeah.
Well, wherever we can get, mate, we love it. So today we're talking about overhead flexibility, and the first thing we should really say is that for the last few weeks, for those of you that are our regular viewers, we've been talking about rehab and getting out of that rehab bubble and back into exercise. Now, this is not a rehab video series. This is about increasing performance. So it's very important that you understand that if you are somebody that's suffering from shoulder injuries, this is not going to necessarily be the best thing for you. This is really for people who are injury-free and who are looking at increasing their overhead shoulder flexibility, which is something that a lot of people struggle with, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just a full disclaimer, if you do have sore shoulders at the moment, or you are kind of working through something, that go back and have a look at our previous videos and make sure you are working with a physio or someone who can help you through it. But yeah, today we're looking at a healthy population who don't have any current shoulder issues, no pain, doing general overhead stuff. We're looking at just increasing performance. But I think it's really important to keep in mind for people who are currently injured that this is the progression. This is kind of towards those final progressions that we were talking about in those previous videos. So just to give you some good ideas on what you can work on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is something that so many people struggle with, because if you've got poor overhead flexibility, then it is going to limit you with what you can do when it comes to things like Olympic weightlifting, handstands, and even just overhead pressing. So like shoulder pressing with a barbell.
Yeah, no, this is going to be a really good way of limiting your exposure to things that might injure you in the future. If you can set up a really good foundation of strength and mobility overhead, then that's just such a common way that people hurt themselves. So
yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, look at this, a bit of rehab as well.
Yep, absolutely. So let's get out on the gym floor. What we're going to do, we're going to just basically go through one stretch that you can do. It's a loaded flexibility exercise, and also one end range strength movement that you can do. And then we're going to come back and talk about what the relationship between these two things that we're doing are, and why they're going to contribute so much to an increase in overhead flexibility and mobility. Now, if you've just tuned in, please hit the like button and leave a comment with your name and where you're watching from. And if you've got any questions about what we're doing here, leave a comment there as well so that we can come and answer them when we get back into the studio. All right, let's get into it.
Off we go. All right, so I'm on the mic today, so you'll be hearing my dulcet tones as Rad goes through the movements.
Yeah. So when we get back into the gym, we're going to talk about exactly which muscles that you need to be working on to increase the flexibility in them. But what we're going to do while we're out on the gym floor, I'm just going to show you guys a stretch that very few people know. It's called the Lat Try Insertion Stretch. And the idea is that you're stretching the lats and the tricep, two muscles that cross over each other at the shoulder joint, that both can limit overhead flexibility.
Yeah, so when you think about what's going to help you with your overhead strength and overhead flexibility, you got to think about what the muscles that are opposing it. So when you're going into overhead, you're in flexion, and you can also be in abduction. So when we're stretching here, we got to think about what are the extensors, because if the extensors are tight or the adductors are tight, then that's going to limit. So when Rad's doing this stretch here, he's working on his lats, as he said, and triceps. So when he's getting up into this position, see how the shoulder's going into that extended position here, and he's also got his elbows in this flexion as well. So when he's in that position, your triceps go from the elbow up to your shoulder joint, some attach into the humerus there, and then one part of your tricep attaches into your shoulder blade. And when you think about your lats, they're coming all the way down from your hip joint here and up into, well, pelvis and up into your shoulder here as well. So when you're saying that crossover point, it's where this muscle is getting stretched and this muscle is getting stretched, allowing the unlocking of that overhead flexion.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. And that movement there, because I'm coming out of the rehab phase and into we don't like that word, do we? But out of the regression phase for shoulder rehab and into the progression phase for a slap tear that I've had and also a torn supraspinatus. So for me, this is really challenging because it is putting my shoulder into a position that I haven't been training it in for a while. This is this whole thing that we've been speaking about over these last few weeks, that when you get an injury, you regress. And I regressed to a point where I wasn't pushing my shoulder into these positions. So for me to do that now, it's quite challenging for me. What I would do as I progress it, I'd put a little bit of weight on this dowel rod, and I would also go onto my feet. So I go up onto my feet.
Yeah, so do you want to demonstrate the difference there with if your shoulder can handle it? But so we're starting out, this would be a nice way to start if you haven't done this before, is before he was on his knees. So this is just putting the weight through here, trying to keep fairly neutral through his spine, and then just should feel the stretch up through here and down there. Now when he goes up into his feet, now that's adding that kind of loaded component we've talked about before in loaded stretches, where we're sort of towards that end range, but we're developing strength there to be able to maximize that.
Yeah, it's full on. It's a wicked stretch. And what you want to do as well, another note is, don't let the dowel rod rest on your shoulders. You want to keep it a loaded stretch, which means that we want to be lifting up a little bit so that the tricep is under a load, because the tricep really experiences the load from what you have on this dowel rod, whereas the lats are experiencing the load just from holding your body weight up.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. And just like a really simple stretch to people who maybe aren't quite up to that at the moment. For the tricep, you can be doing just a stretch down like that, isolated. And for the lat, you can come across, use a pole, and then stretching through here. So that's just some simple sort of breaking down to stretch each of those individually if this is a bit too challenging for you. But again, today's episode, we're really talking about it's all about performance rather than the regression for rehab. So yeah, different to our last few weeks. Now,
we're just come down here, I'll quickly explain. So now we're doing something called MOILS, which is an acronym for Maximum Overcoming Isometric Load. And when we go back into the studio, we're going to talk about the reason as to why doing something like this is so critical for developing overhead flexibility. Because what we're doing now is we're out of stretching and we're into end range strength. So we're into creating strength in the end range of the movement. Yeah. So I'll go down and feel if you just talk.
Yeah, so Rad's going to get into the position here first. So again, we've stretched out the things that are going to be limiting that overhead, and now we want to build up the strength of the muscles that are going to hold us up into that position and pull us up into that position. So what Rad's doing here is he's got the weight plate on the dowel rod there to try and provide some resistance, and he's pulling up against it, and he's isometrically contracting these muscles in the back of his shoulder. So what that's doing is just getting that muscle activation we've talked about, that neural drive, down to these muscles, and he's now taking the weight away. And from that position, now he's contracting exactly the same muscles that were being resisted by the weight plate. But now, because he doesn't have the weight there, he's able to lift his arm up and into that position. So that's really working on those, building the strength through those muscles and
very challenging. Very challenging.
Yeah, not much movement, but
yeah, try it yourself. A lot of people can't even do what I did there. It's you have to regress it even further. So come back into the studio.
So we'll head back in now, and we'll talk through a bit of why we're doing that and why it's such an effective way of doing things.
So here we go. We've got Ferris from Toronto. Thanks for tuning in, brother. So if you've just tuned in, please hit that like button. Let us know in the comments your name and where you're watching from so we can give you a shout out. So Yeah, let's talk first before we go into the end range strength, because we only discussed a couple of the muscles and really one stretch that you can do there. Phil, do you want to talk about the all of the muscles that are really involved in limiting overhead flexibility?
Yeah, so if you want to go deep dive into the shoulders, I recommend looking back into the video we did, I think 3 weeks ago, the video series we did 3 weeks ago, where we kind of went through the bit more of the anatomy and how shoulder injuries happen. I talked through in a bit more detail, but just quickly, again, when we're thinking about that overhead position, there's a few things that are going to limit it. There's the muscles that pull you up into that position, the muscles that are doing the opposite, and if they are tight, then they might limit it, and then it's also movement of your thoracic spine and your shoulder blades. So there's a few different things there. So when I just discussed out there the muscles we were aiming to stretch at the beginning, we talked about the tricep and the lats, but as I said, those are your extension muscles, but there's also your adductors, and they'll be limiting abduction. So that's that movement, and flexion is the one out in front. So your pecs, so both your pec major and to some degree your pec minor, which is going to cause the winging of your scap, a bit of winging in your scap. If they're tight, that will limit as well. So if you go back to those previous videos and look at the doorway stretch or the floor stretches we did up against the doorway, then that's going to be a really nice stretch to add in there as well. But today we just showed those.
Well, what we're going to do this week, we're actually going to show some really good regressions and stuff like that. So if you tune in for this week's series, Yanni and me, when Phil goes away on Wednesday, we'll take you through some really good stuff with this. So that's the first key insight. The second key insight that we want to talk about is that the gradual exposure to this stuff is really, really important. What I've just shown there's some pretty gnarly stuff in there, and a lot of you won't be ready for it. But the idea in today's show is just to give you guys some ideas about what it is that we're going to be talking about this week and what you can do to change up what you're doing. See, a lot of people really don't understand the importance of end range strength. Yeah. They think that it's just a matter of stretching.
Yes, it's a really good idea for some people who may have been doing a lot of overhead pressing, dumbbells, barbells. Maybe you've tried out, lots of hanging or other things, and just haven't quite got to that level where you're feeling confident overhead. So this is the sort of progressions from people who've been training quite a lot of already. But still, when you're starting out something new like this, it's really important to take that gradual approach, because as I've talked about before, and sort of the biggest thing with injuries is people try and do something too quickly, and your body doesn't have a chance to send resources to all those structures that need to be strong enough to be able to handle it. So with this, definitely a gradual increase in both the amount of time you spend doing it, the intensity you do it at, and a really good place to start for those of you that haven't tried this before. Ido Portal is known for doing this really cool thing called the 30-day hanging challenge, where you basically just try and hang for an accumulated total of between 4 and 7 minutes a day. So if you can only hang for 15 seconds, it would mean that you would, if you wanted to try and go for 4 minutes, you would do that 16 times throughout the day. You'd hang for 15 seconds. And it's a good way to, just introduce yourself to this overhead position, with gradual exposure. Yeah, so for how that could work for these exercises, I think, a bit harder throughout the day unless you work in a gym to be able to get on the ground and set up the whole sort of situation there. But certainly each time you heading into the gym, just starting off with a short amount of time, feel that. What was your sort of rep ranges there on the
moils?
Yeah.
So you do on the moils you do 3 times 5 seconds lifting against an immovable object. So the point of that is that you cannot move the object. So the amount of weight is arbitrary. It's just like for me, if I did 10 kilos or 25 kilos, it would make no difference because it's an immovable object. Then you remove the weight and you do 5 ballistic reps where you lift as fast as you can to create a fast concentric contraction. And then you do 1 5-second hold as high as you can.
Yeah, so generally the way I'd kind of recommend getting into something like this is that you want to work at a where you're not going to give yourself massive DOMs on the first time. That's what I mean about that gradual exposure. If you've really pushed it to the point where you're getting sore the next day from the amount of stretching you're doing, or sore the next day from the amount of shoulder exercise you're doing, then just back it off. You've got time to work into this. So that's what we're talking about. This is gradual exposure. If you've pushed it that hard that you're getting that sore, then I think that's a sign just to gradually increase things.
Yeah. Absolutely. So the last key topic that we want to talk about today with this is to build end range strength when you're talking about developing overhead flexibility. And this is really for developing any kind of flexibility. This has been a massive missing link for me and Richard and Yanni in our development of flexibility for years and years and years until we learned about this recently, where we just didn't understand the relationship between building strength in antagonist muscles versus the muscles that you're stretching. So for example, with the splits, with the middle splits, you're not just stretching the adductors to try and create the middle splits, you're also trying to strengthen the glutes, the part of the glutes that are responsible for abduction. So you're stretching the muscles that obviously are going to restrict you from getting into that position, but you're strengthening the muscles that are going to actively pull you into that position. And not just strengthening them, but strengthening them in their end range. So if you relate that to the shoulder flexibility, that's the whole point of those models. When I put myself into that child's pose, it's very, very hard. My shoulders are already at that end range, and you could see.
So they're up here. So that's the end range we're talking about.
So and you could see when I was trying to lift that dowel rod, I could barely get it a couple of inches off the ground, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
And a way that you can regress that is you can elevate your head, so you can lift your head off the ground a little bit, which will allow your shoulders to have more range of motion.
So slightly.
Yeah, so if my head was off the ground and my hands were down here, instead of my hands being in that position, my hands would now be in that position. So that would give me a little bit of a range of motion.
A bit easier. And so one thing that's quite neat about this is if you are when you're doing just lots and lots of overhead, when you're up into this position, then the way that the weight is coming down through your arms means that those muscles that sort of pull you into that position don't have to do much work there because the weight is, coming straight down.
Through your structure.
Whereas when you're now in that bent over position, now the leverage on there, the weight's pushing down here, so it's a much harder, there's a much sort of poorer mechanical advantage. It's a disadvantage, so therefore there's a bigger sort of demand there, and that's why you don't need quite as much weight. So it's a really nice way of developing that sort of end range strength with much less weight and much less dangerous. Like if you're trying to build that overhead strength with really heavy weight over there, then there's a lot more that can go wrong than being in that nice sort of safe position where you're just using that sort of mechanical disadvantage to your advantage.
That's a really good point. And that's where a lot of people, I think, get this wrong, is that they, people don't understand the complexity of the shoulder. And this actually leads really nicely into the biggest mistake that people are making here, where they don't understand the complexity of a limited overhead flexibility, what the issue really is, and the relationship between thoracic flexibility, scapular flexibility, the lats and the triceps, the pecs. There's so many different...
and more than just the flexibility of your, but also the strength in those the structures that do that. Because as we talked about before with the shoulder, it's just your collarbone that's attaching your shoulder blade and your arm to the rest of your body. Everything else is just controlled by how your muscles are moving. So there are really quite a few moving parts there, and keying into if it might be a thoracic extension that's limiting you. So if you're in this position, it's going to be really hard for overhead, no matter how many times you do these exercises. If you're not sort of unlocking that thoracic, then it's going to be. So there's quite a few parts there, and over the week we're going to work through each of those and really make it quite clear how you can.
Exactly. And if you take somebody that doesn't understand all of this, has poor shoulder overhead mobility, and just looks at somebody else doing an overhead shoulder press with a barbell and thinking, oh, that's a really great exercise, I'm going to jump in there and try 5 sets of 3 reps with a really heavy weight. Like Phil said, you're putting yourself in a really high risk situation, and when you cause a nasty shoulder injury and you already had a limiting factor in there, that's something that's really hard to bounce back from. So it's all about going back to this gradual exposure, and a really good, what we'll do tomorrow in tomorrow's in tomorrow's video, I'll show you a really easy test that you can do to find out whether you have poor overhead shoulder flexibility. So we'll teach you how you can test for it, and then you can just look at this and say, wow, this is something that I really need work on, and this is something that I need to do some work on. So the key insight that I want to talk today is really about the importance of end range strength. And you've heard us say this a couple of times now. It's not just about creating flexibility in the restricting muscles. It's about creating strength in the muscles that are going to take you there and be able to control your body in that range.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, awesome. So look, we do have a couple of questions here, which is awesome. So let's get into them right now. I've got to look over at my computer here.
And I think just to slightly elaborate on that point as well, that developing that strength in that end range means that all your stabilizing muscles that will be kind of exposed to having to stabilize in those positions as well. So they work together. So when you're up in that position, it's not only those muscles that are pulling you into that position, but also, as we talked about in previous videos, those muscles that are keeping the ball right in the middle of that socket and allowing your scapula to go up into that position. But we'll elaborate on that more throughout the week.
We will, because it's a big topic, this one, overhead flexibility, and I guess probably anything to do with the shoulders is a pretty big topic. It's not really that simple, isn't it?
It's so interesting though. I think it's a fascinating thing to talk about. So
you love it, don't you? Yeah, this is your mojo. So let's have a look here at some of the questions that we've got from people. Now, guys, if you've just tuned in, or even if you've been watching from the start, please hit the like button and leave us a comment with your name and where you're watching from, so we can give you a shout out. So, as I said before, Firas from Toronto, thanks for tuning in, brother. And Firas has said, so I sleep on my side and sometimes I wake up with a neck cramp or a shoulder pinch. Would you consider that an injury?
If it affects you throughout the rest of your day, then certainly that could be, a problem. But if it's just something that quickly resolves, then, uncomfortable, but probably, it depends on, what else you're doing. If you're able to keep training, if you're able to, go into the gym or do your handstands, whatever, pain-free, then no issues there. But, change how you sleep, maybe try different pillows.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Firas, I'm going to give you a little insight into some things that went wrong in my body and how I had to change my sleep. When I was 17, I started to get really bad lower back pain, and that was the very start of my exploration into what led to me understanding that I had something called spondylolisthesis and also a pars defect. But by the time I got diagnosed with an with an X-ray, they couldn't tell me if it was chronic injury or something that I'd been born with, or a combination of the both, because they are things that you can be born with, and they're also things that can happen through a chronic injury or even an acute injury. And I'd had a fall when I was in the army that really exacerbated the pain and caused me to go and get X-rays. Anyway, so when I first initially was I hadn't had any X-rays or anything like that, and I was seeing a masseuse and also a chiropractor, and eventually after many, many, many treatments, the chiropractor said to me, you might need to look at the way you sleep, because I was sleeping on my stomach, and when I showed the chiropractor how I slept, I was sleeping on my stomach with my head twisted to the side and one knee raised up and externally rotated, and she was telling me about what's going on in my hips for me to be sitting in that position for so many hours at one time. And she said, you might need to try sleeping on your back and see what that does for you. And I couldn't sleep on my back, so I just couldn't fall asleep. So she said, try sleeping on your side and doing X, Y, and Z. And just by changing the way that I slept, it was very, very hard for me for the first 2 weeks. I went through many sleepless nights, but eventually I learned how to sleep. And that was the biggest thing that changed my lower back pain. The treatments couldn't do it. I had to change the way that I slept. So what Phil's saying is really true. And the way that I sleep now is I have a cushion between my knees just to take a little bit of the pressure off the hips. And then I really roll my shoulders forward so that I'm not actually sleeping on the side of my shoulder like that. So I'm getting my shoulder under my body like that. And that's really changed things for me. And I find that if I sleep directly on my shoulder goes numb, and I get some discomfort there as well.
Yeah, or other people sleep with their arm up over their head or things like that. It's hard to control, but if you can...
Yeah, if you can at least try and fall asleep like that, you know?
And use cushions as bolsters to try and block movements. And also you can there's plenty you can try out.
Yeah, play around with that. And then the other thing is, once you get up, even on the days where you don't feel this discomfort, you might want to consider just doing some spinal mobility, where you just do some really gentle circles of the neck, a little bit of movement from side to side, and then the same thing with the spine as well. Just get a little bit of movement in the spine, and we've got some really cool videos in our playlist on spinal mobilization drills that you can do. Anything else you want to add to that one, Phil?
No, I think that's...
Yeah, cool. Okay, we've got Holly K. Knight, or Holy K. Knight, saying, finally caught your live show. Might have missed an important bit. Seems super applicable. Thanks, Holy. I think it's Holy. Thank you, brother or sister. I can't tell from your little thumbnail there. You definitely want to watch the start of this show. There's some really, really cool stuff in here. And if you've just tuned in, please hit the like button and leave us a comment with your name and where you're watching from. And Holy is then saying, what's the best way to find where the fault in a lack of shoulder mobility lies? Let's talk about that tomorrow, because I already said that I was going to show a way that you can test for this. And I think if you're going to be going on Wednesday, I think this is going to be a really good use of your time, Phil. Yeah. So what we'll do is I'll be the model tomorrow, and we'll go out and we'll show you someone with flawless shoulder flexibility. How you? No, I'm just joking, of course. But I do have decent shoulder flexibility.
Actually, really amazing.
But Phil and I can help you to diagnose where your restriction is. You know, whether it's in your through all the areas that we spoke about today. So make sure you tune into tomorrow's episode for that. That's what we'll go through. And thanks for giving us a really good topic point for tomorrow. And if you're watching and you haven't written something on here, this is the best way you guys can get value out of this show. If you tell us what you need to know, we're going to go, there's a show. We'll do it for you, and you'll get a whole show done on what you want to be, what you want answered. Okay, so let's see who else we've got here. We've got Holy again. Robert Burwell has retracted a couple of questions here. I'm guessing that you're trying to find the perfect way of... he's nailed it here. Okay, so Holly is saying, what's the best way to find... no, we've said that one. Holly K. Knight tuning in from Hornsby, Sydney. Just up the road, bro. A local. I get a train from Hornsby every day on my connecting journey from the Central Coast. And Robert Burwell is saying, hi, Rad and Phil. Robert from Rhode Island, USA. Thanks for tuning in, brother. I know that you're a regular viewer, so thank you very, very much. Now, if nobody has any final questions for us, we're going to end the show here. So we'll just have a little chat for 30 or 40 seconds because there's a little bit of a delay from when we're speaking to when it actually goes out here. So Holy's saying, also sorry, I made my username back when I was in school. No problems, brother. I get it. I've had some very funny usernames over the years as well. So yeah, guys, look, if you don't have any more questions, then we will be wrapping up the show. Make sure you tune in tomorrow because it's actually going to be a really, really cool topic. It is an important thing. Like when we decided to do this week on shoulder flexibility, we spent a little bit of discussion talking about how we were going to build this week. And I opted to go for a show where we start the week by showing a little bit more advanced stuff because we have been doing some not, I won't say beginner stuff, but some real
I
regression.
think the last few weeks have been talking more about injury and people who've had injuries and how to progress from the very basics. So now we're looking at more of that healthy population, people who haven't had any issues and they just want to get that more performance side of things. So
yeah, absolutely. So, but tomorrow we will show you guys how you can test to see what it is that that you need the most work on in order to achieve that elusive overhead flexibility. So if nobody else has any more questions, we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, hit the like button, leave a comment with any questions that you have if you're watching this video when it's not live, and we'll get to them tomorrow. And until tomorrow, have a great day, everyone. One last thing, actually. If you are watching and you're a subscriber, you still do have a few more hours to get our amazing shoulder rehab program that we just released on Friday. It's an unbelievable program. It's a combination of everything that Yanni and I have learned over 16 years of being personal trainers, heavily influenced by what we've also learned from Phil as a physiotherapist, and it is what we believe to be the ultimate shoulder rehab program. I will say what Yanni and I believe. This is a disclaimer for Phil. It's written by Yanni and me, but it is honestly, through the amount of shoulders that we've rehabilitated, we're learning that there isn't so many unique things that you need to do for an individual. It's looking at the shoulder as a total unit, and there's certain things that everybody needs to do based on scapular stabilization, rotator cuff health, and there's a really good progression for most people to do in order to rehabilitate a shoulder and take you back into that high performance category of training. So if you haven't got that yet, you've got a limited time to grab it. It's going to be on special still for another about 12 hours from the time that we're recording the show. So make sure you grab it, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a great day.
Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, it's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that far.
It's the consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.